Good morning, church. If you're thankful for Jesus this morning, say amen. Amen. If you are visiting with us, or if you've been visiting with us for a little bit, but you're still kind of in the middle, in between of being a visitor or not, we're still going to call you one, and we're going to treat you like one. And what you'll find is that never stops. We're always going to love you and care about you and be glad that you're here. And so we want you to know that we are super glad that you came and worshiped with us today. Now, I'll tell you the fact of the matter, okay? Normally, right about now, as we're kind of getting ready to kick off into another message, I normally try to think of something smart aleck to say that'll make you laugh, or try to lighten you up a little bit with some type of joke or something that I think is funny. You probably don't think it's as funny as I do, and that's kind of sad. But hey, I always laugh at my own jokes, which is number one. But rather than dive into some kind of joke or have something funny to say or what I think is funny to say, I just want to say this. As we talk about situations like Curtis's situation or the Curtis's situation, the reality is that there's a lot of heartache today. Can we agree with that? Can we get on the same page? There's a lot of heartache. There's a lot of people that are going through things that I personally cannot imagine. And I would not want any part in having to wouldn't want any part in having to deal with some of the things that so many of you guys are having to deal with. I know that so many of you have things on your heart, things on your mind, the world's troubling you, it's weighing you down. And I'll be honest, this was one of those weeks for me where I feel like I really got a good dose of what the world has to offer. And so I just want you to know, if nothing else today, I want you to know that I can't speak for you, but I feel like the most fortunate person on planet Earth that I get to be with my church family today on the Lord's Day. And we get to worship, we get to sing, we get to pray, and we get to dive into a message from God's Word. I hope that you feel the very same way, that we're among the most fortunate people on earth that we get to do this today, that we get to have each other's family, that we get to pray for each other, and we get to be what a family is all about, and that is helping each other. And so before we dig into our message today, we're going to pray together, of course, as we always do, and then we'll get started with our message. So let's pray together. Father God, thank you so much for giving us the privilege of getting to speak to you. God, the fact that you spoke the world and everything in it into existence, and you have given us an avenue to speak to you, Father, is beyond anything our minds can imagine. God, you are holy, you are mighty, and you are so much bigger and so much stronger than the things that we face together. And God, the fact that we get to speak to you is amazing. And Father, as we speak to you, we want to pray for those in our audience today that have heartache. And we want to pray for those who are lost. We want to pray for those who are troubled and those who are anxious, those who are depressed. God, we just want to pray for people who have things going on in their life. And Father, we want to pray right now that as we dig into your word, as we dig into this message together, Father, I pray that you bless our time together. God, I pray that you speak through me. And God, I pray that we can always be looking for ways that we can benefit you. And God, I just pray for the message today, and I pray for your church here in Shakota today. We love you so much, and we give you all the praise for all the good things that are happening. It's in your Son's name that it's all possible. In his name we pray. Amen. How many of you have ever been through a time in your life where you just kind of felt disconnected? Can we be honest? Where you felt disconnected. And maybe when I ask the question, how many of you have ever been through a time in your life where you feel disconnected? Most of you probably went straight to thinking about church. And I was talking about church, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, I mean just disconnected in general. You ever felt kind of disconnected from family? Or maybe you're a husband or a wife, and you can remember a time where you just kind of felt disconnected from your spouse even, or maybe it was your parents or your kids or whoever it is. Maybe you felt kind of disconnected from the world. And in a way that can be a good thing, but maybe there have been times in your life where you feel like things were going on around you and you really weren't in it. And you were just kind of disconnected from anything and anyone and the things that were going on around you. As you know, when I preach messages like this, or whatever the message, I always try to preach things that I know Chase needs to hear. And this is one of those messages that I need to hear, because sometimes, I'm going to be honest, sometimes when you deal with the types of things that people deal with on a daily basis, it's pretty easy to become disconnected. When you deal with that hard person at work, or when you're doing that thing all week long, or you've got your job, your kids, your hobbies, you got all those things, it's pretty easy to become disconnected sometimes, is it not? You find yourself waking up in the morning and you know that that's supposed to be God's time. I'm not saying that's for everyone, but I'm saying maybe for you personally, maybe you wake up and you're saying, man, I know this is normally God's time. I know this is normally the time when I sit down and I get my time in the Word today. And you find yourself not doing it. Or you wake up on a Sunday morning and you typically say something to yourself like, I know this is God's time, but I'm just not feeling it. Like I just feel disconnected. Like I just feel like I'm not very motivated to do what I need to do. Every single one of us have felt that way about ourselves at some point or another, with something or another. Whether it's church or something else, we've all felt disconnected from something or from someone. Now, this is fun. One of the most frustrating things in the world to me, now this is just going to be one of my soapboxes. This is one of my pet peeves. I know there's some other ones here that feel the same way. One of my, I'm talking biggest pet peeves in the world, is when I plug my phone in at night only to discover that my charger has come unplugged from the outlet. Now let me tell you why that's frustrating. Because my outlet, well, not the way it is now, but the way it was for a long, long time, was my outlet was plugged in behind the bed. So when you plug your phone in and it's not working and you realize it's unplugged behind the bed, what does that mean you got to do? You got to get it plugged back in. And one of the most frustrating things ever is when you're, and some of you know this picture in your head. You literally have experienced this, and you know that the struggle is real, okay? When you're trying to reach back behind the bed as far as you can, and you're like feeling around for it. You ever done that? You're like feeling around for the outlet, and you're like not finding it. Like you continue to think that you're finding the outlet, and you're not finding it. And you're trying your best not to like move the bed or anything. So you're wiggling around down there, and finally you think you got it and you don't, and you get frustrated. And so you grab your bed and you throw your bed out of the way, and you're like, okay, I guess I got to get back there. And you get back there and you plug it in, and humanity is restored. But it's frustrating, is it not? You know exactly what I'm talking about. The worst is when it seems to happen in the middle of the night. Like when I'll hear it come unplugged, and like I'll hear it hit up against something, or I'll hear something happen, and you're like half asleep, like you're in that daze, and you're trying to find the outlet while you're half asleep. It's pretty frustrating. But what's interesting about it, and maybe even the most frustrating thing is when you see nothing but your cable and you plug it in and you realize it's not working. Because when you look at your charger, you're like, my phone's plugged in, why is it not working? Church, I'm afraid that some of us are in a very similar situation today. Maybe this sounds like a really cheesy way of putting it, but I'm afraid a lot of us are in a really similar situation, spiritually speaking. I'm afraid that at first glance, it looks like we're plugged in, but in reality, we're not. I think there's a couple of different types of people when you're talking about disconnected. There are those that have been disconnected before and they're now reconnected, and they acknowledge that at one time they were disconnected. There's that group of people. There's a group of people that say, yeah, I'm disconnected now, but I want to reconnect with God. I want to reconnect with the church. Like, I want to get back involved. But there's another group, and I think this one is the scariest of the three groups. There's the group that says, yeah, I'm connected, but they're not. And to me, that's the scariest of the three groups. Let me tell you why I think that's scary. I think you understand why that's scary for obvious reasons. Because when you think you're connected, you're not doing anything to reconnect. But when you're disconnected from God, from the church, from whatever the situation, and you don't know it, then there's no work to be done because you don't recognize that you're disconnected. You ever saw something in someone, something they were doing or something that was happening, maybe it was your spouse or family member or a close friend, and you finally work up enough courage to go and talk to them about it, and when you talk to them about it, they're completely oblivious to it, like they have no idea what you're talking about, like whatever the thing is that you pointed out or whatever you said that they said or how they act or whatever it is, like you point out something in a very loving way, and they just have no clue what you're talking about. You ever been there before? And they just don't understand what you're trying to tell them. That is more frustrating, is it not, than when you go to a person out of love and you say, hey, this is what's going on, and they say, you know what, you're absolutely right. I need to work on that. They may be in the wrong, but guess what? They're trying to fix it. It's more frustrating when a person thinks they're not in the wrong, and therefore they don't want to fix it. I just want you to think about where you're at today. I want you to think about if you're really connected or not. Because here's the thing, for a long time, I thought that I was connected. I thought I was connected, but in reality, I wasn't. Growing up, my family and I know I've told you this before, but growing up, my family and I, we went to church. I say my family and I. My dad didn't go to church, but I went to church with my mom. My mom's an amazing woman. I can't say enough about my mom and the things she went through to make sure we got to church. I can remember we went to church every single week. My mom was really, really faithful, and she said, we're going to go on Sundays, we're going to go on Wednesdays, and it was just a priority in our home. And we went week after week, but guys, I can tell you the truth about it. Even though we went week after week, I had no idea what loving Jesus looked like. I didn't love Christ. I was so far away from loving Christ. Whether I went to church or not didn't matter. I didn't love Jesus. I didn't know what that looked like. I can remember myself, and I can remember not loving him, and I look back at it, and the reason I know that is, well, first of all, Sundays and Wednesdays were the only days that I ever thought about it. I mean, I can say that. Can I speak honestly? Can I be open? Can I be hot with you, humble, open, and transparent? I never thought about Jesus any other day than Sunday and Wednesday. That's a problem. You know that's a problem. But I never thought about him. That was the only days I thought about him. I had what I did during the week. I had my life, my life, and then I had church. And they weren't tangled together. There was church and there was life. Rather than going to church, I should have had the mentality that I'm going to be the church. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. The two are supposed to connect, are they not? Life and church, it's all the same thing. But my family, not only was I distant from him, I know that my family was. And I can say that because, well, first of all, Jesus was never a part of everyday conversation. Like when we sit down at the end of the day and mom's talking about, well, how was school? That's a good conversation. It's a good thing for families to talk. But when my mom would ask me questions about my day, it was always, how was school? Or how was baseball practice? How was basketball practice? How was this test? Or how was this class? And those were our conversations. Now, are those bad conversations? No, they're not bad conversations. But what's missing? What's missing? How's your faith? Are you excited for church? What are you studying right now? Can we study together? Can we talk about it? Jesus was never a part of everyday conversation in my house. And maybe you're looking at that and you're going, you know what? He's really not a part of conversation in my house either. And I want you to be aware that this happens, does it not? It happens that in your busy lifestyle and you sit down at the end of the day to talk to your spouse, your kids, your parents, whatever. If you're not careful, you'll find that you're leaving out the most important conversation to have with your family. And that is Christ, your faith, who you are. Jesus was never a part of everyday conversation. He just wasn't. I can also say that because none of our plans were decided after first considering church. Like when we talked about what we were going to do, for a huge part of my life, when we're talking about this baseball tournament or that basketball tournament or this event or that event, the last thing on our mind when it came to making decisions was church. We didn't think about missing in the sense that it was a big deal. When we were deciding whether or not we were going to go to such and such tournament at this place and whatever, wherever it was, all over the country, all over the continental U.S., when we were deciding whether or not to go to a tournament, it wasn't, do we really need to miss church? It was, well, can we afford it? Because that's a pretty normal conversation, right? Can we afford to go? Does it make sense to go? Do we have time? Do we have somebody that can take care of things around the house? Are we covered? It was that type of conversation. It was never, can we go? Should we miss church? Like that was never a part of the conversation. None of our decisions were made after first considering church. It just wasn't a part of it. I can also say that we were disconnected from God because we were pew potatoes, not pew participants. We sat in a pew, and we did a pretty good job of it. We were in a pew pretty consistently, but we weren't participating. I never, ever had any desire to lead a prayer or to lead a song or to be active in any way. I didn't care. I had no desire. Jesus was never a part of our everyday conversation in my home. By the way, this is not me bashing my parents. My parents are amazing people. Parents make mistakes, don't they? That happens. They're human beings. But Jesus was never part of our everyday conversation. None of our plans were decided after first considering church, and we were certainly not participants We were potatoes, few potatoes. And maybe as you look at this list, you can relate to that. I remember the very first youth focus I went to. It was in Poto. And I can remember my eyes were opened when I went to Poto for the very first time. And I saw all these kids running around. I don't know how many there were. I know there were two. I know there were 150 plus kids there, which to me at the time was crazy. I didn't think 150 kids in the church existed in the world. Like, I didn't think there were that many of us scattered about, let alone in one place at the same time. Like, it just blew my mind. Me and my brother were the only kids, pretty much, at the church that I grew up in. And so the idea that there's 150, 200 kids in one place that all share the same faith, that are together to worship, that blew my little mind. I didn't understand it. And I specifically remember looking around and having one thought, and that is, this is serious. Like, these people take this seriously. I couldn't believe it. All these adults and preachers, youth ministers from all over the place together. I was like, these people take this church thing really seriously. And I felt about that big. I felt about that big. I felt about that big. Because I had never considered that church was anything more than Sunday, Wednesday. You do it for an hour at a time, you go home. I had never considered that there was more to it than that. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're feeling the same way about yourself. And you're saying, you know what? I'm not a participant. I'm not making him a part of my everyday. I'm not who I need to be. I want you to connect, to reconnect maybe. Maybe some of you have never connected with him in the first place. We're going to offer that when we offer the invitation too. But maybe you have connected with God. But you feel like something or another, the world's happening, you feel like you've become disconnected from God for whatever reason. I want to share with you just 3 reasons, and we're not going to take 10 years to go through these, I pinky promise. Normally when I'm on little preparation, like when I have little time to prepare like I did this week, normally that means it's going to be about an hour and a half long. I'm going to try to save you that, okay? I just want to share with you 3 reasons today why you might feel disconnected from Christ. And I think these are 3 very real reasons. I know that they have been for me in my life. Here's reason number 1 why you may feel disconnected. Maybe you feel disconnected from God because you've become disconnected from one another. Now, I want to give you a second to think about this because this is a really, really important point, okay? Maybe you feel disconnected from God because somehow you become disconnected from one another. Again, I'm going to ask your permission. Can I be hot? Can I be humble, open, and transparent? We're going to be honest with ourselves today. I hate the I go to church with them type of relationship. Like, that just doesn't do it for me. And I hope that you feel the same way. Like, when I see you in public and I'm sitting there with a non-Christian or I'm sitting there with a family or whatever, somebody that doesn't know, that doesn't attend with us, and I'm sitting there talking and say, oh, who was that? The last thing I want to say is, oh, that's so-and-so. I go to church with them. Like, that's the last thing I want to say. You know what I want to say? I want to say, oh, that's so-and-so. They do this thing. They work over here, or their kids are so-and-so. Like, they're really into this thing, or they're always at basketball games, or they're always at whatever the situation. I don't want to look at you and go, yeah, that's so-and-so. I go to church with them, and that's all I know about you. That's not enough for me. Not enough for me. Because I'm telling you right now, if you don't think that God created this church thing for a reason and his infinite knowledge and wisdom, if you don't think that God created the church for exactly what we're talking about, so that we could help each other, hold each other accountable, pray for each other, lift each other up. If you don't think that's what God was doing, if you don't think that God did this thing for a reason, you need to think again. God created this for a purpose. And the purpose is to help each other. Maybe the reason you feel disconnected is because you're not really connected with one another. If you look around this auditorium and you're saying, there's a lot of people here that I really don't know anything about. I'm not going to call you out, but I want you to really rethink that. If you look around this room and you're saying, you know what, there's so-and-so, I don't really know his or her name. That happens, by the way. It was 3 years before I knew all your names and I was preaching here. That happens, okay? We're human beings. But if you're looking around and you're going, you know what, I've went to church with this person for I don't know how long, and I don't know the slightest thing about them. I don't know what they do. I don't know what they're interested in. Church, that's a problem. That's a problem. I'm so ready to go beyond the whole I go to church with them relationship. And I've told you about this so many times when I'm in Walmart and people run away from me at the first glance of me. It's hilarious. Don't get me wrong. It's funny. Sadie's shaking her head because she knows. She's seen it. I mean, you'll see people in Walmart and you're like, hey, what's up? And before I can get it out, they're like dead run as fast as they can. I'm talking like 4.5, 40 at 65 years old. I don't know where they come up with the speed. and they're gone, right? It's crazy to me. And as funny as that is, I hate it sometimes. I understand sometimes you got things to do, better things to do than talk to me. I get that. But man, can you imagine if we had first century type relationships? Can you imagine what the church would look like if we had Bible type relationships? I don't like this whole, I go to church with them relationship. I want a Paul and Timothy type relationship. You know what I'm talking about? When you read Paul and the way that he talks about Timothy, isn't it pretty special? You can tell that there's relationship there when Paul is talking about Timothy. You can tell that they're like this. They're close. I don't want the I go to church with them relationship. I want the Paul and Timothy type relationships. To where when I'm speaking about you, I know about you know about me, and we can talk about each other because we have relationship. I want David and Jonathan type relationships. David and Jonathan type relationships. I want the kind of relationship that when I mess up, and it happens, by the way, I know, shocker, not really, but I want the type of relationship that when I mess up, the last thing you are is scared to come talk to me about it. I want that type of relationship. You ever tried to go and correct somebody that you didn't have much of a relationship with? It doesn't work, does it? It doesn't work. It makes it so much easier if we have a relationship. I want David and Jonathan type relationships. I want Jesus and John type relationships. You know what I'm talking about? I want Paul and the Ephesian elders type relationships. You ever read that in the book of Acts as Paul's getting ready to leave Ephesus? And this sounds so weird to us in our culture because it's everything, you know, especially with men. You know how that goes. Don't ever show affection. Don't ever say I love you. You know, that's not very manly. Well, in the book of Acts, as Paul's getting ready to leave him and the Ephesian elders, it says that they were embracing and kissing one another. Now, I'm not saying anything weird was going on. I'm saying in a very I love you like a brother kind of way, they had a very special relationship. And they were so sad that Paul was leaving. They couldn't stand the thought of not seeing him again. That they were weeping together and they were hugging one another. I want that type of relationship. Because when I look at Scripture, that's the type of relationship that Jesus wants for His church. I want to look at this passage in Acts chapter 2. In verse 41, I appreciate Doug so much for reading it the way that he did. We're going to start back in verse 41. And by the way, how many of you, let's be honest, okay, how many of you by a show of hands feel like you've read Acts chapter 2 way more than your mind can even begin to count in your mind? Like how many of you feel like we've read Acts chapter 2 so many times, it's unbelievable. I want you to look at this passage differently than you've looked at it before. This is after the 3,000 are baptized, okay? Or in verse 41, it says, so then those who had received His word were baptized, and that day were added there about 3,000 souls. That's great, but I want you to look beyond that, okay? They're excited. They're baby Christians. They're trying to do the right thing. They don't really know what they're doing, but they know they're doing it. They're doing it 100 miles an hour. They're excited. They're convicted, right? Because 3,000 are baptized in a day. You know they're convicted. And so what do they do with that conviction? That is the question I want you to think about as we're reading this passage. What do they do with their conviction? In verse 42, it says, they were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching. Well, we do that, right? We do that. We read the Word together. We have Scripture reading. We have Bible class. We have sermons. They were devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship. And to fellowship. Do you see that? It doesn't say they were okay at it. It says they were devoting themselves to fellowship. Church, can I ask a simple question? Are we devoted to fellowship? Are we good at it? I'll give you the answer. We're not very good at it sometimes. I'm not very good at it. Are we really devoted to fellowship? And the other thing they were devoted to, it says, and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. And when you study that phrase, breaking of bread, it can refer to a common meal. Let's sit down and eat together. And it can refer to the Lord's Supper as well. And there's definitely the inclination here, giving off of talking about taking the Lord's Supper together. But even the Lord's Supper, man, do you know what it did for me when I finally figured out that the Lord's Supper was about more than just remembering that Jesus died? You know what? That took it to the next level for me when I figured out it's so much more than that. It's not just about remembering that Jesus died. It's about communing together. You and I together on the same page. We're connected. We're unified. And we commune together as we remember what He did for us. When I thought of it that way, it took it to the next level. But they were devoted to all these things. I want you to notice verse 43. It says everyone kept feeling a sense of awe, and many wonders and signs were taking place through the apostles. And all the believers were together and had all things in common. I want you to notice this because this is so powerful. It says, and they would sell their property and possessions and share them with all to the extent that anyone had need. Now, I'm not going to sit here and preach to you that this needs to be you today. I'm not going to do that. I just want you to examine who we are as a church and think, do we see ourselves in Acts chapter 2? It says day by day they were continuing with one mind in the temple. Day by day. How often? Every day. Every day. They were continuing with one mind in the temple and breaking bread from house to house. They were taking their meals together with gladness and sincerity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord was adding to their number day by day those who were being saved. Church, I'm not a very smart guy. There are a lot smarter people on planet Earth than I am. But I'm smart enough to realize that verse 47 is not a coincidence. I'm smart enough to look at Acts chapter 2 and think, you know what? God adding to their number, they were growing, in other words. I'm smart enough, I think, maybe not, that when I look at this, I'm going, you know what? It's not a coincidence that God's adding to their number. Maybe, crazy idea here, maybe the reason that God is adding to their number had just something to do with how connected they were and how together they were, how devoted they were together to their faith. Church, are we devoted to our faith? Is church something that we do, or is it who we are? Maybe the reason that you feel disconnected is because you're not actively seeking this type of relationship. Church, the closer we get to each other, the closer we get to Jesus. Amen? The closer we get together, the closer we get to each other, the closer we get to Jesus. My observation about people is that the more connected they are to each other, the more connected they become with God. And that's also Scripture. It's also what we're talking about right here. I just want you to think about this. Maybe the reason you feel disconnected from God is because you're not really connected with each other. We need to connect with each other. Church, we're family. This is so much more than Sunday and Wednesday. This is a relationship you don't have with anybody else. Not anyone on the planet do you have the same level of relationship with as you and I do, because we have one very big thing in common, and that is a very big God who loves us and cares about us and has brought us together. As I look out, I see a lot of different people that do a lot of different things. I see some people who love football, even some Dallas Cowboys fans, and we're not going to get into all that nonsense. And I see some people who aren't into sports. I see some people who are fishermen. I see some people who've never fished a day in their life. I see so many different types of people from so many different backgrounds. But guess what? Is it not amazing that 2,000 years after the fact, and Jesus is still bringing us together on the Lord's Day? Is that not significant to you? 2,000 years later, and He's still bringing us all together to do what we're doing right now. Maybe the reason you feel disconnected from God is because you're disconnected from one another. Here's reason number 2. Maybe you feel disconnected because you're going to church, but you're not being the church. And you've heard me say something like this several times over the last couple of years. Maybe the reason you're not feeling connected, maybe you feel disconnected because you're going to church like my family was. Like you're there, you're in a pew, you listen, you don't reject it, but you're not being it. You know what? One reason, and I don't want to get off on some crazy tangent here, but you know why I think we're not so good at evangelism sometimes? I think we're not so good at evangelism sometimes because we have the mentality of, I'm going to bring somebody to church. I'm going to bring them to church. I'm going to invite them to church. Invite them to church. Invite them to worship. But guys, evangelism doesn't say, I'm going to bring them to church. Evangelism is, I'm going to take the church to them. You see the difference? I'm not going to bring them to church. I'm going to bring the church to them. I'm going to model it. I'm going to put it on display. You want to know what Jesus' love looks like? Here it is. This is me. How you treat people, how you talk to people, the way that you model Him. People, you've heard this saying a whole bunch of times, people would rather see a sermon than hear one any day. It doesn't matter how dynamite somebody is from the pulpit. If they're not living it, it doesn't really matter, does it? It doesn't matter how often we're together if we're not living it. It doesn't matter how much you love Christ if you're not demonstrating that love to somebody else. Maybe you're in this situation. Maybe you're going to church, but maybe you're not being the church. You know, there have been a lot of times in my ministry where I felt like I was a full-time minister and a part-time disciple. Where I felt like the only time I was getting my studying in was when I was preparing to preach, when I was preparing to teach classes. And I've had to come to the realization that I don't get to be a full-time minister and a part-time disciple. I'm a full-time disciple. And because I'm a full-time disciple, I get to be a full-time minister as well. The message I was preaching at sometimes was about staying connected with Christ. It was a message that I should have been preaching to myself. And that's part of why I'm preaching the message to you now. It made me forget sometimes who I actually was. And it made me forget that you know what, even though I'm trying to instill something in other people, I have to first make sure it's in myself. Before I'm ready to preach something to somebody, I got to make sure that I'm demonstrating it. We're going to read this passage in John chapter 15. It's another familiar passage. Can you tell if a tree is producing fruit? Can you look at a tree and tell if it's producing something? You can you not? Can you look at an apple tree and see if it's got apples on the branches? You can look at it, can you not? So should the same not be said for us? Should people not be able to look at the tree that is your life and be able to see that you're a Christian? John chapter 15 reminds us of that. It says, remain in me. Remain in me. Sometimes the problem is not getting into the kingdom, it's staying in it. He says, remain in me and I in you, just as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, but must remain in the vine. So neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. The one who remains in me and I in him bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. In the same way that you can look at a tree and see if it's producing fruit, people should be able to look at your life and see if you're producing Christ. You wear the name Christ everywhere that you go. Maybe the reason you feel disconnected is because this isn't you right here in John 15. As Jesus is talking about remaining in him and bearing fruit, that is doing good things. It's producing something in your life that other people can see and they can know exactly who you are. Maybe you feel disconnected because you're not bearing fruit for Christ. But here's the thing. Here's the kicker, I think. Did you know that you're producing fruit whether you realize it or not? You're producing fruit for the kingdom or you're producing fruit for something else. We often don't realize that we're always producing something. It's not a matter of if we're producing, it's a matter of what it is that we're producing. And the question I want to ask you today, I really want you to think about this. I know it's cheesy, but does the fruit that you're bearing in your life, does the fruit that you're bearing display the name that you're wearing? Because you wear the greatest name that has ever been worn. You wear the name Christ. Jesus, when you said, God, come into my life, and you were baptized and you gave your life to him, guess what happened? From that moment on, you're wearing Jesus everywhere that you go. The question is, how are you modeling him? How are you living for him? Does the fruit that you're bearing, in other words, the things that you do, the things people can see, can people see Christ in you? Can people see Christ in you? Does the fruit that you're bearing display the name that you're wearing, the things that you do? I remember when Sadie and I got married, and the first time that I called her Sadie Noah, I was just giddy with excitement. You ever been there? The first time you hear your wife's name, the last name, and you come to the realization you get to share a last name now. I just remember goodness, I was a kid, and some of you were saying you're still a kid. I guess we can argue that after the message is over. But I remember being so excited because for the first time Sadie was wearing my name. And then I thought to myself, why in the world do I get this excited about Sadie sharing my name, but I don't get nearly this excited about sharing the name of Christ? I don't get excited about that the way that I should. Does the fruit that you're bearing display the name that you're wearing? Maybe you feel disconnected because the works, the things that you do, is not demonstrating Christ, the way that you treat people, the way that you talk to people. Maybe you feel disconnected, number 3, because maybe you know Jesus, but Jesus doesn't know you. This one's hard to swallow, isn't it? Like, I've sat across the table from people when they have that moment, that light bulb moment, oh, that little light bulb goes off over your head. I've been so fortunate to sit across the table from people that after years and years and years, sometimes decades of believing a certain way, they come to the realization that what they believe their whole life is not true. And they have that light bulb moment, they have that aha moment, that what they believe their whole life is a lie. that it's not true. And as exciting as that is for me, it wasn't so exciting for them. I've seen some people that were devastated because it's like their life crumbled because they thought a certain way and they come to the realization that it's not true. They come to the realization that for years, sometimes even decades, they thought they had a relationship with Christ. They thought they knew Christ, but in reality, Christ did not know them. In John chapter 14, we find what I think is one of the most puzzling verses in the entire Bible. And we're getting close to the end, I promise. I apologize. Just bear with me here. In John chapter 14 and verse 7, it puzzles me. We talked about this with our youth group here a couple of weeks ago. In John chapter 14 and verse 7, Jesus says something that puzzles me. He said, "If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you know him and have seen him." John chapter 14 is the same chapter where Jesus is talking about, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me." Thomas has all the questions. We don't know where you're going. How are we supposed to know where you're going? And Jesus tells him that. All the things in my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. But if I go and prepare a place to you, I will come again and receive you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. You know a lot of those verses in John chapter 14. But of all the things that Jesus says in John chapter 14, this one puzzles me the most. Because Jesus looks at his disciples and he makes a very interesting statement. Now keep in mind, these are people who have followed Jesus every single day for a few years, roughly 3 years or so. And Jesus says, "If you had known me," what's Jesus saying? He's saying, "You don't really know me." Now, maybe that doesn't puzzle you the way that it puzzles me. But if Jesus is looking at his disciples, the ones that he chose to carry on the mission after he died, if Jesus looks at them and says, "You don't really know me," that makes me stop and think about my life. If I were to have that face-to-face conversation with Jesus now, I can't help but think and ask myself, would Jesus look at me and say, "You know what, Chase? I know you. I know you. We speak to each other. You want to hear what I have to say. You read and you study and you pray. You have the Holy Spirit that was given to you and you were baptized. It's guiding your life. I know you." So this becomes the question to yourself. Is it possible? Is it possible to know who Jesus is but not have a relationship with Jesus? Is it possible for you to spend a huge chunk of your life believing that there's a relationship there when really there's not? The answer is yeah, it's possible. It's possible. It is possible to be around Jesus all of our life and still not have a relationship with him. You can know who he is, but not really know him. The scariest verse in all the Bible, and I didn't want to bring this up, but it fits too well. And it's the scary, like I said, to me, it's the scariest verse in the Bible. It's in Matthew chapter 7. It's another familiar passage. I know we're talking about several of those. But Jesus says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day," that is Judgment Day, "Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?" These were religious people, guys. These were religious people. And what does Jesus say to them in verse 23? He says, "And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Leave me, you who practice lawlessness." Isn't it scary? There are going to be people that stand before God on Judgment Day fully expecting to get in, and they don't. That's what he's saying. Isn't that scary? Doesn't it make you think about your life, even if it's just a little bit? Am I right with God? Do I really have relationship? This is not to scare you into coming forward either, I promise. This isn't to try to scare anybody. It's to make a point. Guys, everything that you and I are, if you've heard nothing else I've said or nothing else I'm going to say, I want you to hear this, okay? Everything about being a disciple of Jesus it's all about relationship. All of it. I told you about the young lady a few weeks ago that when I asked the question, "What's your purpose in life?" And she said, "To know God and to make God known." And I thought that was so powerful. Our whole purpose is to know him. What does that mean? That means we have relationship with him. That means that we know him. We know who he is. We know what he did. Because you see this even in verse 23. Jesus says what? He says, "I never knew you." In other words, I never had relationship with you. We can be religious and not know Christ. I want to ask you this question. We're going to close out with this. Does Jesus really know you? Does Jesus really know you? When you think about your life, and you think about what it is and what it looks like, does he really know you? If you were to stand before him right now, face to face, I hope the answer for every single one of you is yes. I pray that. I hope that. But if you were to be able to stand in front of God right now, would God look at you and say, I know you? Would he look at you and say, we have relationship? Because here's the thing. I'm getting level with you because I want you to know the sincerity and the severity of this. The fact that there are those who think they're going and they're not is terrifying. Church, I want you to know today. I want you to know God. Don't make this just something you do. Make this who you are, because this is who you are. You're not a CEO during the week and a Christian on Sunday. You're a Christian every day. Make this who you are. As you're hearing about things that need to happen, step up. Be ready to serve God in different ways in the church. Does God know you? If you could talk to him right now, would he say, yeah, I know you. We have a relationship. We talk. I know you. Or would he say something different? I want you to think about that as we get ready to offer the song of invitation. And we want to pray for you if that's what you need. We want to help you become a Christian if that's what you need. Whatever your desire is, we want to help you take care of it. Please come as we stand and as we sing our song of invitation.